Planting cover crops is a practice that a lot of farmers use to manage the soil in their fields when they don't have anything else growing. These non-harvested crops are used to enrich or rejuvenate the soil, and they do a really good job of holding the soil in place and not allowing as much erosion due to wind and water. Well, as home gardeners, we can also improve our soils with the use of a cover crop, kind of in the off-season of our vegetable gardens. Granted, our smaller home gardens aren't going to have the erosion problems like a large field would have, but there's still lots of benefits we can get from having a thick mat of cool season vegetation over our gardens throughout the winter. Cover crops are good at suppressing weed growth. They block out the light and take up room that those weeds can't occupy. They do a good job of keeping the soil from getting crusted over or getting compacted from rainfall. And by having those plants in place, the water and rainfall will soak into the soil a little better, a lot more so than if the soil was bare, where we'd get a lot of surface runoff. The cover crops also help keep certain nutrients in the root zone and keep them from being leached or washed out of there. Another good way that the cover crops enrich our garden soils is by what we do with them once we're finished growing them. About a week or two before we start planting the garden in the springtime is when we come out and we incorporate that cover crop or till in the cover crop. This is known as adding green manure to the garden, and it's a really good source of organic matter. And of course, lots of times on the program, we've told you all the wonderful benefits of adding organic matter to the soil. It provides soil nutrients, it provides water and nutrient holding capacity, and just overall improves the structure of the soil. Well, we've got a section here in our vegetable garden that we don't have any fall crops planted, so we're going to sow a cover crop. And this is really a good time of the year to be doing this because September is the optimum month for sowing cover crops for the fall season in Oklahoma. This will give the plants plenty of time to get established before the cold weather of winter gets here. Well, there are lots of different plants we can use as cover crop material, but they're usually grasses, legumes, or small grains. And we've got the seed of a few examples right here. We've got some winter rye. Then right here we've got annual ryegrass seed. And then we've got crimson clover. And we've got Austrian winter peas over here. Now the winter rye is a fairly easily established grain crop that we can use as a cover crop. A unique thing about the winter rye is that it releases a chemical that suppresses the germination of broadleaf weeds. So it's kind of like nature's own pre-emergence herbicide. The annual rye can get fairly tall by the time spring arrives, so you might want to mow it a few times before you try to till it in. That way it'll keep your tiller from getting tangled up with all those stems. The annual ryegrass is a cool season annual grass that sometimes we see people sow into their Bermuda lawns to provide some green cover over the winter. But it's a really good material for a cover crop because it's vigorous and really easy to establish. Now the crimson clover and the Austrian winter peas are both legumes, and they have their own unique way of enriching the soil. Legumes form symbiotic relationships with a type of bacteria in the soil called rhizobium. The rhizobium occupies sites on the roots of the plants, and these are called nodules. The rhizobium have this unique ability to capture nitrogen gas out of the atmosphere and convert it into a form of nitrogen that the plant can use. And in return for the nitrogen from the rhizobium, the plants provide carbohydrates or food to the bacteria. Well, in our native soils, we have native rhizobium, but whenever we bring a plant that is an introduced legume into the garden, our native rhizobium may not form the correct symbiosis with the plants, and we may not get very good nitrogen fixation. So for that reason, we need to use an inoculant. We have to provide the bacteria or the rhizobium. We've got a few little packets here of some of the inoculant that you can purchase, And these are specific for different types of legumes. You can see this is an alfalfa clover inoculant, and over here we've got a cowpea peanut inoculant. And we had these here in our cooler because they need to be kept in a cool, dark location. They expire pretty quick if they're out in the heat and in a bright light. And when you purchase these, it's also important to be sure and read the expiration date to make sure that hasn't come and gone, because what you're purchasing is a living organism. The legumes, of course, need this inoculant mixed in and attached to the seed, or inoculated before we plant it. So that's what we're going to do right here. Now you can buy a sticking agent, or you can make your own with syrup, honey, molasses, or we're going to just use regular Coke. But I'm going to set this up here. Put some of the seed of the Austrian winter peas here in this bowl. We'll add a little bit of the Coke to the mixture here. And what we're basically doing is just trying to provide something that will help this inoculant, this rhizobium, stick to the seed. The inoculant, or these little rhizobium bacteria, are packaged with kind of a peat moss type media to keep them alive. So we'll just pour that on there, maybe add a little bit more. And you can't really add too much of the rhizobium to your seed. We'll stir this up here. Kind of looks like we're making a mud pie or something, but we'll make sure that each of these Austrian winter pea seeds is coated with the inoculant. Now when you're doing this, it's a good idea to get these seed planted as quick as possible. And if you can't plant them within 24 hours, it's a good idea to come back and do this again. Make sure your bacteria are still alive. But we'll mix this up really well. Like we got right here, just kind of make a nice little slurry, and you can see those seeds are really getting coated really well. I'll slip my glove on here. And now we're ready to plant in this area. You can see we've got the area tilled up really well. We've got our seed bed prepared, and I'm just going to scatter these seeds out in the area. Now if you wanted, you could use some type of a little whirlybird type spreader to spread these out, but I'm just going to do it by hand here. And then once they start coming up, we'll see how good of a job I did at getting these spread evenly on the soil. Well, in this spot here, we're just going to do a mixture of all of these cover crop seed. So we'll have grasses, legumes, and grains all growing together. Once we get all of those in place, we'll then grab our garden rake and go over the area and lightly till that in. Get the seed well worked into the soil. Get good seed to soil contact so they'll absorb the moisture and start to germinate. Once we've got all that done, we'll pull out the water hose, wet down this area, and keep it moist until the plants emerge from the soil and establish themselves. Well, hopefully we'll have a nice stand of a cover crop in this area, and in the springtime we'll have a lot of that green manure we can incorporate or till into the soil.